Emma lived in a small town where life moved slowly, and dreams often seemed far out of reach. She worked as a teacher, living a simple life filled with routine. But there was one thing that made her heart race with excitement: music. Emma had always loved playing the piano, even though she had never received formal training. She learned to play by ear, picking up tunes from the radio or from the soundtracks of her favorite movies. Her fingers would dance across the keys whenever she found a moment of peace, and the music would carry her away to a world where anything was possible. Despite her love for music, Emma had never thought of herself as a real musician. She didn't have the qualifications or the expensive lessons like others who had studied at prestigious conservatories. She didn't wear the fancy concert gowns or play in front of large audiences. But her heart was full of music, and she believed that was enough. One day, Emma received a letter that would change everything. It was an invitation to audition for a performance with the famous Maestro, a renowned conductor known for his sharp tongue and high standards. The letter was unexpected, and Emma couldn't believe her eyes when she read it. She had heard of the Maestro's reputation. He was known to be demanding, often mocking performers who didn't meet his expectations. He had a way of making people feel small, even when they had talent. But still, the thought of performing on such a stage, of having the chance to show the world what she could do, filled her with both excitement and fear. She had never been on a stage like this before. The concert hall where the auditions were held was grand, with high ceilings and walls decorated with golden trim. The sound of footsteps echoed as people walked through the massive lobby, and the smell of polished wood and fresh flowers filled the air. Emma felt out of place, like a fish out of water. She looked around at the other musicians, all of whom were dressed in sharp suits or elegant dresses, their faces confident and assured. They seemed to belong here, while Emma felt like she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. Still, she didn't turn back. She held her head high and walked into the audition room. There, sitting at the front of the room, was the Maestro. He had a reputation for being a genius, someone whose skill and taste were unmatched. His sharp features and stern expression gave him an air of authority. He barely glanced at Emma as she walked in, his attention focused on the papers in front of him. "Ah, you must be Miss Emma. What will you be performing for us today?" the Maestro asked, his voice cold and indifferent. Emma froze for a second, unsure of how to respond. She hadn't expected him to speak to her at all, and the sound of his voice made her stomach twist. But she took a deep breath and smiled softly. "I'll be playing a piece by Beethoven," she said, trying to sound confident. The Maestro didn't react. He simply nodded and motioned for her to begin. Emma sat down at the piano, her hands shaking slightly. She placed her fingers on the keys and started the piece she had chosen. The notes came out slowly at first, her hands carefully following the music. But as she settled into the rhythm, something changed. The music began to flow more easily, and Emma felt herself becoming lost in it. The piece wasn't perfect, she wasn't a trained pianist, but it was heartfelt. Every note came from her soul, from years of playing by herself in her quiet home. She could feel the Maestro's eyes on her as she played. His gaze was sharp, almost critical, and she couldn't help but feel the weight of his judgment. His expression remained blank, giving away no hint of what he thought. She had seen videos of other auditions, where the Maestro would immediately stop a performance if something wasn't right. He was known for his unforgiving nature, and Emma knew she wasn't playing at the level of the other musicians in the room. But Emma didn't stop. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. She played with everything she had, her fingers moving over the keys, her heart racing with every note. The music filled the room, and for a brief moment, she forgot about the Maestro's gaze. She was no longer worried about making mistakes or being judged. She was just a woman, sitting at a piano, sharing her love for music with anyone who was willing to listen. The last note lingered in the air for a moment before Emma slowly lifted her hands from the keys. Her heart was pounding, her palms were sweating, but she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had done it. She had performed. The room was silent for a long moment. Emma looked up, her eyes searching the maestro's face for any sign of approval. But all she saw was indifference. "Well, that was something," the maestro said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "It was clear you don't have the formal training. Your technique is lacking, and your interpretation of the piece was unconventional, to say the least." Emma felt her heart sink. She had expected some level of criticism, but hearing the maestro's cold words sting more than she had anticipated. She tried to hide her disappointment, but she couldn't help feeling the weight of his judgment. It was hard not to let his words affect her. I I understand," she said quietly, standing up from the piano. "Thank you for your time." The maestro didn't even look up from his papers as she left the room. She could feel the sting of rejection in her chest, but she held her head high. She had done what she set out to do. She had taken a chance, stepped out of her comfort zone, and shown the maestro and herself that she had the courage to follow her passion. As she walked down the grand hallway, the sound of her footsteps echoed in the empty space. She felt small, insignificant, but she knew she couldn't let that feeling define her. She had come this far. The maestro's mockery didn't matter. What mattered was that she had shared her music with the world, and that, in itself, was enough. The next few days after Emma's audition were filled with a whirlwind of emotions. She tried to keep herself busy with work and life in the small town, but every time she thought about the maestro's words, her stomach twisted. It wasn't the kind of criticism that made her want to improve, it was the kind that made her question everything about herself and her abilities. The harshness of the maestro's words echoed in her mind, replaying over and over. Unconventional. Lacking technique. These were the words that stung the most. She had worked so hard to get to that moment, and yet, it felt like all her efforts had been dismissed. But even in the face of such harshness, Emma's love for music remained. She knew she couldn't let that audition define her. She had always played the piano for herself, for the joy it brought her and the way it made her feel alive. And although the maestro's words had hurt, they couldn't take that away from her. Music had always been her escape, her way of expressing what she couldn't say with words. It wasn't long before Emma's phone rang. She stared at the screen for a moment, unsure if she wanted to pick it up. It was an unknown number, and she wasn't sure if she could handle another disappointment so soon. But curiosity got the better of her, and she answered. "Hello," she said, trying to sound calm. "Is this Emma Green?" a voice on the other end of the line asked. "Yes, this is Emma," she replied, her heart beating a little faster. "This is Sophia Marshall, the assistant to Maestro Montgomery. I'm calling on behalf of the maestro. He wanted me to let you know that he was impressed by your audition." Emma froze. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The maestro? Impressed? Was this some kind of joke? I'm sorry, did you say the maestro was impressed?" Emma asked, almost laughing at the absurdity of it. "Yes, that's correct," Sophia said. "He mentioned that your performance had something unique about it. He wants to offer you a chance to perform in front of a larger audience. It's a special event he's hosting next month, and he believes your style would bring something fresh to the performance. He's willing to give you another chance." Emma's mind raced. She had barely processed the first part of the conversation before Sophia continued, explaining the details of the performance and the event. She felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. Was this really happening? The maestro, the man who had dismissed her with such ease, was now offering her a second chance. Emma wasn't sure whether to feel honored or confused. Part of her wanted to believe it was an opportunity to prove herself. But another part of her couldn't help but wonder if this was just another test, another way for the maestro to show her that she didn't belong. "Thank you so much," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. I'll be there. I'll do my best. Sophia gave her the details and wished her luck before ending the call. Emma stood there for a moment, unsure of what to feel. The excitement of being offered another chance was quickly met with doubt. Could she really do it? Could she stand in front of a larger crowd, under the maestro's scrutiny, and perform with the same passion that had driven her before? The next few days passed in a blur as Emma prepared for the event. She spent hours at the piano, practicing the same piece she had played during her audition. But this time, she worked on every detail, every note, trying to perfect it. The music she played felt different now. It wasn't just about the joy of playing anymore, it was about proving herself, showing that she could rise above the doubt and be the musician she always knew she could be. As the event drew closer, Emma's nerves grew. She couldn't stop thinking about the maestro. What if he was only offering her this chance out of pity? What if he was just trying to show her how much she still had to learn? The uncertainty gnawed at her, and she found herself questioning her decision to even accept the invitation. But then she would sit at the piano, and the music would flow again. The doubts would fade, if only for a moment, and all that mattered was the music. She couldn't give up on that. The night of the performance arrived, and Emma found herself standing backstage, peeking out from behind the curtains. The concert hall was packed with people. There were rows upon rows of seats, all filled with eager faces, and the orchestra was tuning up on stage. The maestro stood at the front, his back straight, his expression focused. He looked every bit the part of the genius conductor he was known to be. Emma's palms were sweaty, and her heart beat faster with every passing second. She hadn't realized how overwhelming it would be to perform in front of such a large crowd. She had played for small groups before, but this was different. The lights were brighter, the expectations higher, and the stakes felt much greater. "You're going to do fine," a voice said from beside her. Emma turned to see Sophia, who gave her an encouraging smile. "The maestro believes in you. Just play like you always do. Don't let the nerves take over." Emma nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed Sophia's words. She was just a simple woman, and she didn't belong in a place like this. But the moment Sophia left, Emma stepped forward, ready to face the stage. She was shaking, but she wasn't going to back down. This was her moment. When she stepped out onto the stage, the crowd fell silent. The maestro nodded at her, and the orchestra began to play. Emma took her seat at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. She took a deep breath and began. At first, her nerves got the best of her. Her fingers trembled, and she stumbled slightly over the opening notes. But then, something shifted. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music guide her. She forgot about the maestro, the audience, and even the doubts that had been clouding her mind. She played the piece with everything she had, pouring her heart and soul into every note. The music filled the hall, and for the first time in a long time, Emma felt at peace. As the last note of the piece echoed in the hall, Emma opened her eyes. She had done it. She had poured everything into that performance. The silence in the room lasted for a brief moment before the applause started. It wasn't just a polite clap, it was a real, heartfelt ovation. The audience was on its feet, clapping loudly, their admiration clear. Emma's heart soared. She had done it. She had shown herself and the maestro that she was more than just a simple woman. She was a musician in every sense of the word. The maestro stood at the back of the stage, his arms crossed. His eyes met Emma's, and for the first time, there was no condescension in his gaze. There was only respect. Emma smiled to herself. She hadn't just proven herself to the maestro. She had proven to herself that she could do anything she set her mind to. As the days passed after Emma's performance, she felt like she was walking on air. The applause still echoed in her ears, the feeling of the audience's appreciation warming her heart. She had always dreamed of performing in front of such a large crowd, but now that it had happened, she couldn't help but feel both elated and overwhelmed. She had done it, she had proven herself in front of the maestro, and more importantly, in front of herself. But despite the applause, she couldn't shake the feeling that the journey wasn't over. There was more she had to show the world. The maestro, who had watched her perform from the back of the stage, seemed different now. His usual coldness was gone. There was a flicker of something else in his eyes, a respect, perhaps even admiration. Emma had seen it, and it made her wonder, did he see something in her that she hadn't realized was there? Could it be possible that she had something special after all? The days following the performance were filled with a whirlwind of activity. The maestro had invited Emma to join the orchestra in some of their upcoming performances. She was still a little in shock from the invitation. At first, she had assumed it was just a formality, a way for the maestro to test her again. But when she saw her name on the official program, she knew it was real. She was truly part of the concert now. It was a strange feeling. Emma had always been content playing her music in the quiet of her home, sharing it only with a few close friends and family. But now, she was part of something bigger, a performance that would be seen by hundreds, maybe even thousands. And yet, she didn't feel ready. There was a nagging voice inside her, telling her she didn't belong there. She wasn't one of the highly trained musicians who had studied for years in prestigious schools. She was just Emma, the woman who had learned to play by ear, the woman who had spent countless hours alone with her piano. But she knew she couldn't let that voice stop her. She had worked too hard to get here, and she couldn't let fear control her. She remembered how she felt the moment she sat at the piano on stage, the nerves, the doubts, but also the excitement. She had never felt so alive as she did when the music poured out of her. And now, it was her time to do it again. As the night of the next performance approached, Emma spent every free moment she could practicing. The music felt different this time, there was a certain weight to it. She wasn't just playing for herself anymore. She was playing for the maestro, for the orchestra, and for the audience. And although the pressure was heavy, there was also something freeing about it. She was no longer just Emma the teacher. She was Emma the musician, standing side by side with some of the best players in the world. The more she practiced, the more confident she became. She could feel the growth, not just in her technical ability, but in her spirit as well. The night before the performance, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, her mind racing. She had played this music 1,000 times in her head, but now, in the quiet of her room, she couldn't quiet the doubts that lingered. What if she didn't live up to the expectations? What if she made a mistake? The maestro had given her this chance, but was she really ready? Just as she began to drift off, she remembered something the maestro had said to her after her audition. You didn't play with the precision of someone trained in the most prestigious schools, but you played with something far more valuable, emotion. His words had stuck with her. It was the one thing she had that the others didn't, her heart. The emotion she poured into her playing was what made her stand out. It wasn't about the technicalities. It was about the connection to the music, the connection to the audience. With that thought, Emma finally fell asleep, a little more at peace with herself. She knew she couldn't control everything. But she could control how much of herself she put into the music. And that was enough. The day of the performance arrived. Emma's nerves were still present, but they were no longer paralyzing. She stood backstage, dressed in a simple black gown that made her feel both elegant and out of place. The orchestra was tuning up, and she could hear the murmurs of the crowd from beyond the curtain. She took a deep breath and tried to calm her racing heart. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. The maestro was standing nearby, giving last-minute instructions to the orchestra. His eyes flickered briefly toward Emma, and for a moment, she saw a glimmer of something, approval, maybe. She wasn't sure. But whatever it was, it made her feel a little stronger. The lights in the hall dimmed, and the audience fell silent. Emma could feel the weight of their attention on her. This was what she had always dreamed of, the chance to stand in front of an audience and perform. She walked onto the stage, her legs feeling like they might give way beneath her. The maestro gave her a nod, and the orchestra began to play. She sat down at the piano, feeling the cool touch of the keys beneath her fingers. The music began, and Emma lost herself in it. The nerves, the doubts, they all faded into the background as the music took over. Her fingers moved effortlessly, each note flowing into the next. The audience was quiet, but she could feel their attention, their anticipation. She could feel the energy in the room building, and it only made her play more passionately. For a moment, she forgot where she was. All that mattered was the music. It was as if the piano was an extension of herself, and her fingers moved instinctively, playing with the emotion that had always been at the heart of her music. She played through the piece, each note resonating with her soul. She wasn't playing for perfection anymore. She was playing for the sheer joy of it, for the connection she had with the music, and with the people listening. When the last note finally sounded, Emma opened her eyes. The room was silent for a moment, and her heart skipped a beat. Had she done enough? Had she played well enough? But before she could worry, the applause began. It was slow at first, almost hesitant, as if the audience wasn't sure if they should clap yet. But soon, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was genuine, heartfelt appreciation. The audience was on its feet, cheering for her performance. Emma stood up, her knees shaking, but her heart was full. She had done it. She had performed with all her heart, and it had paid off. She smiled as she took her bow, the sound of the applause ringing in her ears. She looked toward the maestro, who was watching her from the back of the stage. He nodded, a slight smile on his face. For the first time, there was no judgment in his eyes. There was only respect. Emma knew that this was just the beginning. She had proven to herself that she could stand on that stage and perform, that she could face her fears and doubts and come out the other side stronger. She had more to offer the world, and this was only the start of her journey. In the days following the performance, Emma's life began to shift in ways she had never imagined. The applause, the respect from the maestro, and the admiration from the audience filled her with a sense of accomplishment, but there was something else too, a new energy inside her. She had always believed that music was her escape, a way to express herself in ways words couldn't, but now she was realizing that it could be so much more. Music wasn't just something she did, it was something she was meant to share with the world. Emma's phone began to ring more often than it ever had before. Calls came from the maestro's assistant, from event coordinators, and even from the media, all asking her to perform at different venues, to be part of other concerts, or to share her story. She was overwhelmed by the attention, but in a way that felt both exciting and humbling. The maestro had kept his word. After that night, he became one of her biggest supporters. He told her that her performance had been a turning point, that the way she connected with the audience through her music was something rare and beautiful. He was determined to help her grow and was now making plans for her to join upcoming tours and performances with some of the best orchestras in the country. At first, Emma couldn't believe it. The maestro, who had once been so dismissive, now treated her like a colleague, a fellow artist. Even with all the attention and excitement, Emma couldn't help but feel a little bit of fear. She had never imagined that her music would take her this far. She had spent her life in the shadows, quietly playing in her living room, never expecting to be in the spotlight. It felt like she was stepping into a world she didn't fully understand, a world full of perfection and high expectations. The more successful she became, the more she feared she would fail. What if the next performance wasn't as good? What if the maestro expected more from her than she could give? She didn't have the formal training the other musicians had. But the fear didn't last long. Emma had learned something in her first big performance when she played from the heart. The music became more than just notes on a page. It became a conversation with the audience, a story that they could all connect with. And that was something no amount of formal training could teach. It was something she already had inside her. She spent the next few weeks preparing for the next big performance. She practiced for hours every day, pushing herself to improve, but also reminding herself that it was okay to make mistakes. She didn't have to be perfect. She just had to be real. The day of the concert arrived, and Emma felt a familiar nervousness stirring inside her. The concert hall was bigger this time, and the stakes felt higher. She stood backstage, waiting for the moment to step into the spotlight. The orchestra was already on stage, tuning their instruments, and the audience was settling into their seats. It was as if the whole world was waiting for her to perform, and Emma could feel the weight of that expectation. But as she took a deep breath, she remembered something her grandmother had once told her: "It's not about the applause, Emma. It's about the music. Always remember that." With those words in her mind, Emma walked onto the stage. The bright lights blinded her for a moment, and the vast sea of faces in the audience made her heart race. She sat at the piano, the same piano that had felt like a safe haven for so many years, and placed her hands on the keys. The maestro was conducting the orchestra from the front, and he gave her a nod. She took a deep breath, and the first note of the piece filled the room. The music flowed from her fingers like it always had, but now, there was a new confidence in her playing. She wasn't playing to prove anything to anyone. She was playing to share something beautiful, something that came from the depths of her soul. And as she played, she could feel the audience's attention on her, but it didn't make her nervous. It made her feel connected to them, as if they were all part of the same story, the same moment. As the piece continued, Emma's mind began to quiet. She wasn't thinking about the audience anymore, or the maestro's expectations, or even the fear that had once consumed her. She was simply playing, letting the music carry her wherever it needed to go. And in that moment, she realized something: she didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to be present. The music would take care of the rest. When the last note rang out, Emma opened her eyes and took a deep breath. She had done it again. She had poured her heart into the music, and it had carried her through. The room was silent for a moment, and Emma held her breath, waiting for the applause. And then, slowly, it started. The audience stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, and Emma felt a wave of emotion rise within her. It wasn't just the applause that moved her. It was the feeling that the music had connected with them, that they had felt the same thing she had felt as she played. The maestro was standing at the back of the stage, his arms crossed. When he saw Emma looking at him, he gave her a nod of approval. His expression was one of respect, not just for her music, but for the journey she had taken. Emma had come a long way since the first time she had met him, and it felt like she was finally starting to understand what it meant to be a true artist. After the performance, Emma was surrounded by people: fans, reporters, and other musicians, all eager to congratulate her. It felt overwhelming, but also wonderful. She had always been shy, always kept to herself, and now she was being recognized for something she had always loved. But in the midst of the excitement, Emma's heart was calm. She didn't need the applause or the accolades. She was doing what she had always wanted to do, and that was enough. In the days that followed, Emma began to realize something important. Her journey wasn't just about music, it was about finding herself. It was about stepping out of the shadows and sharing her gifts with the world, no matter how uncertain or vulnerable that made her feel. And as she looked back on everything she had accomplished, she knew that this was just the beginning. The maestro had given her a chance, but it was her heart, her passion, and her willingness to be vulnerable that had carried her this far. And that was something she would never forget. Music had always been her escape, but now, it was her voice. And with that voice, she knew she could go anywhere. After the performance, Emma's life felt like it had completely transformed. The applause still echoed in her mind, but it was more than just the sound of approval. It was a sign of something deeper, a recognition not just of her talent, but of her journey. She had been to the darkest places of doubt, had faced rejection, and had wondered if she was good enough. But now, standing in the bright lights of success, she realized that it wasn't just about playing the perfect notes or impressing the audience. It was about being true to herself, about allowing the music to flow from her heart. In the weeks that followed, Emma's calendar filled up with performances, rehearsals, and interviews. She found herself traveling to different cities, playing in grand concert halls, and meeting other musicians and artists. There were moments when the whirlwind of activity felt overwhelming, but she knew she was living her dream. And the more she performed, the more she realized that it wasn't just the applause that kept her going, it was the music. The connection she felt to the audience, the way her heart opened when she played, and the way she saw the world through the lens of music, it was all part of the magic that had pulled her forward. But even with all the success, there were times when Emma would sit in her hotel room, alone, and wonder if it was all real. She wasn't used to the attention, the fame, or the expectations. She wasn't used to being recognized as an artist, as someone who had something special to offer the world. It was humbling, but also scary. She had never seen herself as a star. She had always been Emma, the simple woman who played the piano in her quiet home, never imagining that the world would take notice of her. One evening, after a particularly exhausting performance, Emma found herself sitting in the back of a quiet cafe, nursing a cup of tea. The bustling city outside seemed so far removed from the world of stages and bright lights she had come to know. She felt like a stranger in her own life. She didn't belong to this world of high society and fame, but the more she played, the more she realized that she couldn't turn back. Music had become her language, her voice, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. As she sipped her tea, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Sophia, the Maestro's assistant. The Maestro would like to meet with you tomorrow morning. He has some exciting news. Emma's heart skipped a beat. The Maestro had become more than just her mentor, he had become a guide, someone who believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. What could he possibly want to tell her? The next morning, Emma met Sophia and the Maestro at a small cafe near the concert hall. The Maestro was sitting at the table, looking as composed and focused as ever, his sharp eyes scanning the papers in front of him. When Emma walked in, he looked up and gave her a smile, one that was rare for him, but one that made her heart flutter with pride. "Good morning, Emma," the Maestro greeted her, his voice calm but warm. "I trust you've been well since the last performance." "I have, thank you," Emma replied, sitting down across from him. "It's been a lot to take in, but I'm enjoying every moment of it." The Maestro nodded thoughtfully, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. "I'm glad to hear that. But I didn't call you here just to talk about the past. I've been watching you closely, and I must say, I've seen something extraordinary in your playing. You've grown, not just as a musician, but as an artist. There's a depth to your music now that wasn't there before. You've learned to connect with your audience, to let them feel what you're feeling." Emma felt a flush of pride at his words, but there was also a feeling of uncertainty. "Thank you. But I'm still learning. I don't know if I'm ready for what's next." The Maestro leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady and thoughtful. "That's exactly what makes you ready. You're not pretending to be something you're not. You're not trying to live up to some image of what a musician should be. You're playing with your heart, and that's what matters most." Emma listened carefully, trying to absorb his words. He was right. She had spent so much of her life feeling like an imposter, questioning her worth as a musician because she didn't have the same formal training as others. But the maestro was telling her that it didn't matter. It was the emotion, the connection, the rawness of her playing that set her apart. She had always known that music was about feeling, but hearing it from him made it feel real. "I've been thinking," the maestro continued, "about your future. You have the potential to do much more than just play in concerts. I've spoken with several orchestras, and I believe it's time for you to step into a bigger role, something that will challenge you in new ways. I want to offer you a position as the soloist in an upcoming international tour. You'll be traveling with a renowned orchestra, performing in some of the world's most prestigious venues." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had heard of international tours, but to be invited to join one was something she had never even dreamed of. I I don't know what to say," she stammered, her heart racing. "This is unbelievable." The maestro smiled again, this time with a warmth that made Emma feel like she was truly being seen. "You've earned it, Emma. You've worked hard, and you've shown that you have something special to offer the world. I believe in you. And I know this tour will push you to become the artist you're meant to be." Emma sat back in her chair, trying to process everything. It was happening so fast. She had always dreamed of traveling the world, of sharing her music with people far beyond her small town. But now that the opportunity was in front of her, she wasn't sure if she was ready. But then she remembered the first performance. The fear, the nerves, the doubts, all of it had been there. And yet, she had done it. She had stepped into the unknown and had given everything she had to the music. This was no different. It was another chance to grow, to face her fears, and to share her heart with the world. "I'll do it," Emma said, her voice steady and confident. "I'll go on the tour." The maestro nodded approvingly. "Good. I knew you would. You're ready, Emma. This is just the beginning." As Emma walked out of the cafe, her heart was full. She had stepped into a new chapter of her life, one that was filled with unknowns, but also with incredible opportunities. She had come a long way from the quiet woman who played in her living room, unsure of whether anyone would ever hear her music. But now, her music was reaching the world. She had proven to herself that she could overcome her doubts, that she could stand tall and share her voice. And now, the world was waiting to hear more.